Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pastoral Thoughts Podcast. This is your host, Jack Young, and in studio, we've got Pastor Gabe Gonzalez from the New Testament Baptist Church over in Irondequoit, and then we've got missionary Vincent Blanchard, and it's good to have him with us. He's going to be presenting his ministry tonight. He's going to be preaching for us tonight, and it's going to be great getting to know him a little bit on this podcast. And he is a missionary to restricted access countries. And Brother Blanchard, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on here.
So tell us a little bit about what it is to be a missionary to a restricted access country.
Yeah, so I'm a missionary, church planting missionary, pretty similar to what most missionaries do, except I can't really talk about where I'm going. I'm a missionary to the largest restricted access country in the 1040 window. Hudson Taylor went there, just to give you a little hint about where I'm going. But basically what that means is that we can't be open about what we are doing. The government doesn't really approve of what we're doing. But because God wants us to give the gospel to people, we are going maybe under a different guise, maybe illegally, but doing the same thing essentially.
And so on your visa, perhaps you'll be a English teacher or some sort of a instructor or something like this. Yeah,
so I'll probably... maybe, I don't know who's listening, maybe the government will be, but either, English teacher is a common way, a student visa is a common way, and so I have multiple ways in which I will be entering the country that I could be, and so I will start out with one, but I want all available routes open, but I can't enter by telling them I'm a missionary.
And so you have to be very careful because if you get found out, most likely they're not going to put you in a gulag or anything like this. They would just kick you out of the country, no access back.
Exactly.
And then you wouldn't be able to go into those people. So you just have to be very careful. Guard your tongue, and especially now with this internet age, it's not like in the old days, the only way information was circulated through like tapes or something like this. But now, especially since COVID, everybody live streams their service. Mm-hmm. So I can't imagine the pastor, I say enough stupid stuff, I can't imagine some pastor not getting up and just open up his mouth and telling the folks where exactly you're going to.
Yeah, I try not to be too secretive on certain forums. Just don't tag me, if you're ever on Facebook, and maybe you can find me on Facebook, but don't say, hey, looking forward to you going to such and such country or whatnot.
Canada.
Right.
Yeah. There's a big underground church in Canada right now. So.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. Well, Brother Vincent was at your church this morning. And,
that's right.
And so how was the presentation and everything?
Well, I really appreciate his well thought out vision for where he's going, and not just because even though it is a restricted access nation, many missionaries have gone and many missionaries are still there. And one thing I was just saying right before we came on was that I appreciate how well thought out he was when he was deciding where in that country to go. Mm-hmm. And that it's important for missionaries to really think through where have missionaries been and where haven't they been, even in a popular country to be a missionary. Mm-hmm. Even though it is restricted access, there still are a lot of missionaries there, and have been for how long?
I don't even know. Their history traces back for so long, but especially during the Boxer Rebellion, you're talking about 17th century, later on 18th century, 19th century. This place has been a very popular location for Hudson Taylor and for other types of missionaries who you've probably read books on if you've read any missionary biographies.
Yeah, so for a couple hundred years, there has been a gospel presence, but in certain popular areas. And so I really appreciate him for seeking places, or seeking a place where...
In the area that Brother Blanchard's gone to is...
there hasn't been anything.
Yeah, one single Western missionary that he has been able to come across.
Yeah,
that has gone there in history.
Yeah, I can give a little background about it. There are 48 million people in this place. It's home to the largest minority of that country, and since the 17th century, there is no record of any missionary in that area, and that's not Baptist missionary. That's any denomination that you want to name. Even if you want to call Catholicism a branch of Christianity, you wouldn't find anything there. And so, the 17th century, there was a tiny bit of influence, but since then, there's been none. Multiple contacts, multiple people in that I know have. I just said it. We can bleep that out. I said the word, okay? But multiple contacts in the country that we're going to, talking to them. They don't know anybody there. No mission boards that we know anybody there. And so it is vastly unreached.
Yeah, we'll bleep that out there. Bleep. Yeah. No, that was really funny, actually. Brother Gabe and I are doing a great job, but
it's hard not to say it.
that is something. Well, tell us about your calling, and then tell us else who inspired you, because you must have some sort of a mentor or something, because you're going to an area where there's no foundation, the regions beyond, where no foundation is laid. So what inspired you to do this?
Well, do you want me to share my testimony to salvation? So I grew up I grew up as a bus kid. My family, there was a lot of alcoholism, in and out of homeless shelters and foster care, and so got saved after foster care. I got saved at the age of 10, but very bitter against the Lord, very angry with Him about some things that had happened in my life, and so. The only reason I went to church is because the bus captain bribed me with Monster energy drinks to get me to go to church. And
every do it.
Rev them up. Yeah.
Every service. He gave them to me after church because he didn't want to deal with that. And so went to church for a long time, and just because that's free babysitting, energy drinks, it worked out for me. And at the age of 16, my sending pastor, who was an evangelist at the time, preached a message on bitterness. And I knew I was saved, but I was very bitter, and so I prayed and talked to the Lord and began talking with my youth pastor, Brad, who was a huge influence in my life, and talking to him about the bitterness and saying, I want to surrender my life to the Lord, and whatever that looks like, I'm going to do that for Him. And at the time, I had no idea it was going to be ministry, but we had teen services where the youth would lead the services twice a year, and every year they could get people to do songs and they could get people to do offering, but they could never get people to do the preaching part. And so were asking for volunteers. Nobody was raising their hand. I certainly wasn't raising my hands. I was terrified of public speaking, and so the pastor's wife said, well, Vincent's going to do it. And I said, absolutely not. And I didn't know the rules. And she said, no, you're going to do it. And I said, you're out of your mind. 0% chance that I'm going to do this service. But they made me, and I was a pushover. And so I said, fine, I'll do it. You have to teach me how. So he gave me a ton of books, and I read them very quickly because I was terrified. And I had 15 minutes, and in 4.5 minutes of much fear and trembling, I got through my first sermon. And I said, I was never going to do that again. And did it again, and I decided that, man, for some odd reason, I like this, and I could see myself doing this. So I began approaching my youth pastor and told him that I asked him, what is being called to the ministry? And so he showed me that verse out of 1 Timothy, that he that desireth the office of a bishop desireth a good thing. And so he began teaching me about the desire, teaching me about the qualifications of a bishop, and specifically said, you need to start reading, you need to start training in doctrine. I was pretty far behind. I was the only bus kid in a youth group of easily 20 people who were all homeschooled and taught doctrine. So I was behind, and began devouring books. He began teaching me, spent a ton of time with him. He sent me off to Bible college out at West Coast Baptist College for a little bit. And I told the Lord, God, I'll serve you in full-time ministry, just not as a missionary. and got to West Coast. God began working my heart to be a missionary. And so I said, okay, Lord, but there's no way I'm going to the country that I'm going to. There's a lot of missionaries there. It's a popular destination, has been for a while. I'm reading a book about a guy who went there, and there's just 0% chance I'm going to that country. And while I was there was a young man who was training. He was a national who was training to go back to that country to start churches. And he said, Vincent, you should consider this country to be a missionary. I said, no, there's already people there. I want to go somewhere unreached. he said, there are over 1 billion people in this country. You're going to find somebody who's not reached.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I began praying. Well, things fell through at college as far as finances and with my family, and so I had to come back home. Met my future wife, and her father-in-law offered me a position at his church as an intern. And so between my youth pastor, he was a huge influence. My father-in-law was another huge influence, and ultimately a missionary in the country where I'm going to called me up and said, hey, we're starting an underground school there, and we've got an underground church here, and would you be willing to come? And I told him probably not, maybe in a year or two. And he called my father-in-law and said, how about they come in 3 weeks? And so my girlfriend at the time and I went to the country. She lived with some teachers. I lived by myself, and we worked there for a year and enjoyed it there. I was the youth pastor. I was a teacher. She was a teacher. Led some English services and really enjoyed it until at the end of the first year. The police came to our church while I was out of the country for my visa, and they came to the church and they stopped the services. They closed down the building, and they sent the missionary home. He had been there for 21 years, and everything changed at that point. Well, the church was now meeting in apartments. Nobody knew what they were going to do. The missionary was being sent home, and we felt that the Lord was leading us to stay. And so my wife and I came back, got married, went back to that country, and stayed for 2 more years. The church that had a nice 2-story building and 80 people now was confined to half the population, half the group, and we're meeting in apartments. It was all cramped. We had to be more secretive. The pressure came out more. The youth group began meeting at my house just so that we wouldn't draw attention to the church. The church was now under the leadership of a national pastor. And we were full-time college students at the time as well. So we're still teachers, youth pastor, full-time college student. After 2 more years, so a total of 3 years in that country, we came back to the United States realizing that God was preparing us to return to that country. But we needed some administrative work, maybe learning how churches work behind the scenes to give us a better insight for churches. And so we came back to work with our sending church, which is Green Road Baptist Church in Madison, Indiana, and have been there for 2 years. During that time, I worked with them. I stopped pursuing Bible college because in that country, Bible college degrees are very much not sought after, and could even get my visa rejected as soon as we put it on the application. So began working there, started deputation in August, and obtaining a business degree to help me be more undercover in case I ever need to use that for my visa.
More of an appeal for the government to have you there if you're
exactly,
a business degree.
During all that time, there have been many men, my youth pastor starting out mentoring me, my father-in-law mentoring me, the missionary in that country initially mentoring me, and now there's a missionary that I'll be returning to work with. He's over there. We'll call him Nick. That's his first name. Mm-hmm. And he has been influential in printing Bibles over there, and he started a church, has handed it over, and even when we return, he'll be in the process of beginning a new church. So we'll be able to watch from the start to finish how a church is planted and handed over. And so, of course, obviously, I've never finished seminary, but the different men, the different mentors, and the mentor is still my sending pastor and that missionary who have encouraged me, but also taught me theology, questioned me on things, but also practically showing me how the work of the ministry is done.
Yeah. And what's your game plan when you get on the field as far as language? Yeah,
so I've learned most of, at least the foundational parts of the language. I've learned the grammar. I've learned the pronunciation. I've learned a small vocabulary. And when I go back, I'll have to go to language school. I'll probably test out of the early stages, and we're still taking lessons now. But part of my getting into the country and staying in there is going to be being a student.
Yeah.
And so I will have to do it anyways for my visa. But yeah, I'll have to go to language school, but I can get around now.
How old are you?
I'm 26.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and the country you're going to is very regional in nature.
Yeah.
And you did say it was the largest minority.
In that.
So when you eventually move from where you're going to start down to where this minority is, well, you have to relearn a different language.
That was a good question. So we didn't talk about that at your church,
No, we
but
didn't, yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to word it without. So the country that I'm going to, there is one language that is spoken primarily throughout that country. And so even though there will be a local dialect, the people that we're going to reach have multiple languages. The largest one being the language spoken by that people group. But they also, in the college cities, they would speak the national language, and the Bible's in the national language. So that's why we will be focusing on larger cities where we wouldn't have to relearn a dialect.
Okay, good.
And so when you go and you help this missionary and you're learning the language, how many years do you think you'll be with the missionary that you're going to at first?
Yeah, so that is really all dependent on how quickly I can learn the language. Typically it'd be a 4-year bachelor's degree, but I would probably test out of the early stages. And so I would imagine I could finish it in 3 years, but 4 years is probably how long I'll stay. One, because that language is particularly hard when learning the Bible and learning sermons and preaching. But also it's going to offer me the actual seeing a church from start to finish. And although, you could learn that from other programs, seeing it in that country and that local context, I think is going to be beneficial for my wife and I to see start to finish. How is a church started in that country? How is it planted? How are nationals trained? And how is it handed off?
Sure. And I remember when I was 26. When I graduated Bible college, 27, and getting in the ministry. And, you think 27 is old when you're 27, but man. So a decade when you're 37, if you make it to that area, to me, I think you're betting 1,000%. If you're learning and growing along with that church and learning and growing in the language. Hudson Taylor, didn't he preach like 10 hours a day in the middle of the village?
Yeah, he was quite the preacher. He did preach a lot. They would hold a lot of overnight stuff and would do medical missions and whatnot.
Now the townspeople, I'm pretty sure I'm talking about Hudson Taylor. It's been a little while since I read about him, but he set up some sort of bamboo structure right in the center of the town that he was first starting at, and so people would come in to hear this white guy talk. And so he didn't have like converts at all, but he was explaining the gospel to them like day after day, and people would wander in and out, and he would speak to them. And I wonder how interested, because I know people, for instance, in Thailand and different places like that, missionaries that go there, they say people come up to you and they're interested in being a Christian. I want to know about being a Christian. Can you tell me how to be a Christian? And they just don't. They're interested. I wonder if there's similarities in these different countries that you'll be going to.
Definitely, yeah. In fact, we're in that country, Americans are kind of celebrities over there. They'll hand you their kids. They'll take pictures of you. They'll follow you everywhere. They'll ask questions because they equate Christianity with Americanism. And so to be American is to be cool. Therefore, I want to be Christian because that's an American thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And so because I was wondering if you would automatically pique interest, because here there's not going to be too many Americans over in my village or in my city, and so I'm going to see what this guy has to say, and I want to learn about his culture and his people, and so there'll probably be a lot. I would think a lot of ministry opportunity, at least to practice, if nothing else, sharing the gospel with people.
Yeah, it'll definitely be. I mean, obviously, going to a restricted access nation, and we probably won't be able to put up a bamboo tent right in the middle of the city. Well, that'll be a good way to go to prison or get kicked out of the country. But
I believe Hudson Taylor, the areas that he was in, was controlled by the British, wasn't it? Before the Boxer Rebellion.
Yep.
Yeah. So he had that privilege. He was flying under the Union Jack over there. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. I guess as far as churches stateside and how we prepare our young people for missions, you may not be able to answer this. I don't know if you've ever thought about it that much, but it says, what can churches do here stateside to help our young people prepare for a restricted access country? The one thing, like, for instance, that I think of is maybe at a young age, maybe if you are a Christian and you're in a youth group, maybe not exposing yourself on social media so much if you have any future inkling of going to a restricted access nation. What are some thoughts you might have on that?
So I'm going to shoot from the hip on this. So this is not necessarily order of importance, but number one, I would recommend young people to really focus on relational evangelism, in that obviously Americans, we're used to tracts, and we're used to, some people are used to street preaching and stuff like that, and those all work in American context, but that's not going to work in a restricted access nation. If you want to go to jail really quickly, you go for it, but relational preaching is the most effective, even in America. It's statistically, the people in church are here because they know other people, and people start witnessing to people at your job or at school and stuff like that. And that is going to prepare you for those kind of nations. Also remember that there are parts of church in America that are here because the Bible says that we have baptism as a part of church, and there's no way around it. That is a biblical thing. Preaching is here because it's not a cultural thing, it's a biblical thing, but church in a restricted access nation might not have some of the luxuries that we have. It might not have, and so getting over the American part of the cultural part of our church might be something to learn early.
Different preconceptions and traditions. For instance, like there's nowhere in the Bible that says at 9:30 thou shalt have Sunday school followed by a 10:30 morning service. And 6 p.m. evening service. So you're outside the box, but in the book over in these restricted areas. And there's a missionary that I know in Nepal. I don't know him personally, but I read his stuff. Most of the Nepalis get Saturday off. Now they still have church on Sunday. They don't meet just on Saturday, but they have their biggest church service on Saturday because a lot of people have to work on Sunday. So you have to work around that. And in these restricted countries, you might have multiple church services. And a lot of times we think of the church services, it's restricted to 3 hymns, in 4/4 timing, followed by announcements, followed by passing around a plate, where in all actuality, you might be you're singing a psalm or two quietly. And then you're open up the Bible and have a small group, and then that group leaves and another one comes in, and
maybe even in a more like teaching style rather than
you're sitting at a table like we are right now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, I really appreciate the fact that you're talking about witnessing in a relationship style, where the Bible says, "Come, let us reason together." And I think also, if you think of the people who influence you with the gospel, it's probably not someone who knocked on your door. We do door knock. We're for that. But it was probably someone who sat down with you and showed you that they cared for your soul and talked to you, maybe bought you lunch and whatever else.
Yeah. And it's so important in that obviously door knocking is good. It has its place. There might be people, and especially in a place like this, like Rochester, there are going to be people where nobody in the church knows that person. And that's when door knocking and stuff, that's important. But the relationships are more important, not just in a restricted access nation, but also here.
Yes.
So for a young person or a youth pastor teaching their youth, you're saying it's important that we recognize the elements that are uniquely American, and trying to separate the aspects of church culture that are uniquely American from what's biblical, and try to focus on what's biblical that'll work in a context outside of America. And I like that.
Absolutely.
There's more. I mean, I would highly recommend anybody interested in working in restricted access nations, or even just on the foreign field, to get some practical experience. My wife and I knew we were called to this country beforehand, but living there for 3 years before starting deputation gave us way more confidence as far as for churches too. They're looking at us and saying, well, these people have lived there for 3 years. They're not worried that the culture shock or the most missionaries quit on their first term, but having been there for 3 years and knowing what to expect has given us a much deeper confidence in what God is calling us to.
And living there for 3 years, you were past the culture shock.
Yeah.
Because I think if you were staying at somewhere, I think it's longer than 6 months, you experience culture shock. It's when there's no light at the end of the tunnel and you're like stuck there.
Yeah, you get in a crisis mode. They call it crisis, and there's like stages.
Yeah.
Of
So
shock.
3 years, you're past that, and then now you're saying we're going to go back. God's called us to this field, and I could see why pastors like myself would be excited about that fact that, man, he's already been there, he's done it, he's already has experience. Let me ask you this, because there's probably somebody listening here that they, like you've experienced some hard times in their life, maybe has some rough backgrounds. There's a fellow, I don't know if you know him, his name is Larry Kraft. Do you ever heard of Larry Kraft? He's a street preacher, goes to all these big events cross country and preaches, gives out. I mean, he'll be like at anywhere from like Mardi Gras to, what's that?
Indianapolis 500.
Yeah, he'll go to the Olympics and whatever. Got a bunch of kids. One of my favorite people. He's got a good spirit. I think he was in 38 different foster homes as a kid, and he's got I think 11, either 11 or 12 kids, and they're like their kids. His kids are awesome. They're great kids. My wife and I love his kids, but God used his background to. He could have been better. Instead, he was better. But how do you think that your background, God has used that as an asset for you in becoming a missionary and just in your calling?
Yeah. So first of all, it was difficult to get over that, and I mentioned that a little bit. It was hard. But what it has done is I do best evangelistically and relationally with hurting people. People. Because obviously, someone who has grown up as a pastor's kid can relate and can give good biblical advice to someone who's hurting, but there is a depth of being able to relate to someone when there's mutual pain. And also one thing that might be different, my wife experienced culture shock, but I did not. I went to 9 different schools before I graduated. My parents had food stamps, and so every once in a while we wouldn't have anything to eat, and we were never had security, never in a stable home, and that could obviously have made me bitter. But what it did was, when I went to that country, it wasn't my home, but I had never lived in a place for longer than a few years, and so what is this? To anything else, I had lived in a dirty environment as a kid, but I mean, it was dirty over there, yeah. But I was, since I had never had a place where that was what was drawing me and pulling me to home. When I had gotten to that country, there was no. I had been highly adaptable to different environments, and so that was a huge benefit.
So your background and your upbringing was actually your training ground. It was your proving ground. And that's what people, if they're, you're listening, you had a hard time with your experience. You have to look at that as your gymnasium. God was exercising you in certain areas, and with you in particular, God used that to give you empathy. So since you've experienced emotional pain, you can feel the hurt of others, and you can help minister to them that way. And then also, that guy Larry Kraft the same way. Like growing up in 38 different foster homes, like he can, they just go from place to place all over the country, and he never had a permanent dwelling growing up. And so being a pilgrim and a stranger here on this earth was like no problem. And so I would figure that the Lord would use you and strengthen you for your calling through that. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even feeling hunger, in the places that you're going to be going to, there's going to be a lot of people that are hungry, and you'll know what it's like when it wasn't your fault. Like for me, we went with little, but I never really went out without. My mom did a very good job of that. But and so if I go hungry, it's because of my choice, because I'm fasting or whatever. And so it's my choice. So I know what it feels like, but I don't know what it feels like when it's somebody else's fault I'm hungry. It's only I'm choosing to. And you know what it's like when you have no control over whether you ate that day or not. And so I think that gives you unique experience being an American, especially going to a place where probably half the country is hungry like that.
Yeah,
and,
be flexible and adaptable. And yeah, if there's no food in the pantry, I'm like in panic mode. Like, oh my goodness. If you're just hey, it is what it is. We'll eat. We don't die.
Yeah.
We'll come across food somewhere somehow.
Relate to people like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts or?
That's about all. I'm looking forward to following his ministry, just to see if you do run into any Christians that maybe in another. Oh, I said it.
Terrible.
Hey, that wasn't me this time.
We'll have to beep that out. Sorry about that. I was doing so well. But maybe a church in another area has sent somebody, a national has sent somebody to that area that nobody knows about. And I wouldn't be surprised if you find someone.
Yeah,
there's something there.
I tell people all the time. So I'm going to an area of 48 million people. And so obviously we're praying that God calls other people. And God, that's our big burden. But people have asked, what are you going to do if you find other people in that area? That's a great thing. I won't have to start ground up with nothing. If I can find men who have already been trained a little bit, that is going to make the training nationals. That's going to make the process go quicker. Right,
and
you're
not going to get to that town and find out it's a Bible Belt and they've got a Baptist church on every corner, you were down in Knoxville or something like that. Yeah. And it's not going to be like that. If you find any Christians, it'll probably be, oh wow, it's going to be 1 in 1,000. I would imagine. And
if you do find a pastor, he probably wasn't really trained, or at least doesn't know the Bible, hasn't gone systematically through it, or things like that, because Bibles aren't
right. And so if you find anyone who names the name of Christ, that's going to be a really exciting thing. I would have to figure there wouldn't be tons of Christians around. So that's exciting. Do you have like a social media presence, or if someone did want to find out information about
you?
Yeah,
so if you wanted to find out information about us, I would recommend going to BlanchardMissions.com. Blanchard, BLANCHARD, missions.com. From there, you can find my phone number, my email, and a link to our social media. And you can find out more about us. Reach out anytime, any questions. We, especially if you're a pastor looking to schedule meetings in November and December of this year or next, we'd love to hear back from you.
When are you planning to get into the field?
Yeah, so we started out in August of 2020, and we are at 40% support, 41% support right now. And so with that, realistically, we will probably be in. Man, I did it again. We'll probably be in that country by spring of 2022.
Okay, that's great. That's because you're doing great on deputation. But I have to say that I did win the
You won.
Country. I didn't mention it one single time.
Mention what?
Hey, thank you. Thank you for being with us, and looking forward to hearing you tonight and seeing your presentation. Looking forward to hearing you preach. So thank you for being with us. Thank you so much today for watching this podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Also, if you'd like to reach out to us by way of email, you can email us at pastoralthoughtsmail@gmail.com. And if you'd like to, I do write a blog, and you can subscribe to that at pastorjack.org. Thank you, God bless you, and have a great day.